extracting sections of an image and then expanding off of them is a great way to move from realism to abstraction. So in this photograph here that I took in India, I actually just extracted or defined 5 different rectangles. So I'm going to take this image, I'm going to actually go ahead and cut out those rectangles, and so the rest of the image is just going to go away. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these rectangles out. Each one's a little different in terms of its ratio, and some are long and thin and some are more square. So I'm going to cut these out. So I have 5 to work with. I'm going to put them down below for now. The second one I'm going to cut out. And then the rest of the image can just go away. Maybe you'll use it at a later date for something, but for this particular expansion project, you're just going to need 5 sections. Sometimes I like to choose sections that have some linearity to them rather than like a big puffy cloud in the sky. Sometimes I like to use things that have a little architecture or a little bit of sort of hard edge to them, but you can really experiment in any way that you like. So I'm going to just cut out this last shape. And then what I'm going to do with these shapes on this piece of multimedia paper is I'm just going to glue them down. So I have a glue stick here, and I have a shape, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a bit of glue on the back. And you know, you may want to start by experimenting with their arrangement a little bit, but sometimes it's kind of nice to actually do it randomly, because then you're forced to be out of control a little bit of what might happen next. So I'm going to place that there. I'm going to put this here. I'm going to leave some space between them. So you notice I'm not honoring the original image at all. I'm just putting glue on the back and placing them down with some space in between. And in my mind already, I'm sort of noticing a little bit of relationship between the parts. But again, I'm not really trying to pre-plan anything. This beautiful red up here. I'm just using a glue stick, but you could also use something a little hardier for this. So now I have my 5 sections, and they are having a conversation, a really different conversation than they had before when we were looking at the original photograph. So the next stage is moving them in together, looking at relationships. So I love working with a ballpoint pen. You can do this really any way you want. An ultimate boundary around it will happen, but maybe don't dictate that yet. So what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start to take some clues from the image. Coming off this line, I'm going to come down and connect to that one. Coming off this line, I feel this sort of fluid connection to this shape here. These branches make me want to curve up to that. Maybe this branch can curve down to that. So I'm making these relationships, creating these segues between parts that didn't happen before, obviously, because I've completely transformed the image. There's a little red circle here, maybe this. So I'm just extending out from these parts, and now I'm starting to maybe think about having a certain structure around it. So I'm going to go in and just roughly start to maybe dictate what the boundaries of this image might be. So notice I'm bringing it in a little bit, and it's very rough, and that's okay. So now that I have a boundary, I can connect this down here. Maybe this ends up being a double line coming off that gray shape. Maybe it starts to curve down towards the ochre. This area here, maybe I'd extend that out. I like this branch. I'm almost wanting a little bit of a curvature this way. So you can see, and then there's a diagonal here. So I'm coming off of the sections of the image. By doing so, I'm sort of expanding them out to the rest of the picture. And once I start to have some pleasing shapes, which is starting to happen, I might want to have a few more segues, but once I start to have some pleasing shapes, then I start to think about maybe color. And for instance, here I have this sort of pinkish peach shape, and I'm tempted to use a bit of gouache, and maybe it's not going to be the exact right color, but I can start to paint in off of this shape. I can even paint over the shape a little bit. I can start to occupy this shape with this color and just sort of notice how it might start to intersect with the next section. You can do this with colored pencil. You could even do this with watercolor. But what watercolor is not going to give you is the opportunity possibly to paint over the original image, because gouache will do that, because gouache is opaque. So that's kind of a fun segue. And I can also maybe start to bring in a little ochre. These colors I pre-mixed, but I kind of like the idea of maybe expanding off of this image to that blue shape here. And if I want to maybe start to come in with some of the blues, I can bring in, I have sort of a slate gray blue here, and I can maybe start to bring that off of this blue shape. So bringing in this slate gray here starts to connect these areas, and I can even maybe bring that down into this lower section. So what starts to happen is the image just evolves based on these new shapes, and over time you can really get a very beautiful abstract situation. And using the same image, another option is to work with colored pencil, and that would give you just a different sort of effect. So I encourage you to experiment, starting with 5 parts, extending them out through drawing, finding a boundary, and then starting to work in with some color shapes to create a new abstraction, a new image from an old image.